this beautiful sunny day. As Gay mentioned, I'm Holly Truitt. I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the National Science Foundation EPSCoR program. And tonight, before introducing our lecturer, I'd like to thank our two funding organizations, the National Science Foundation and then the Montana Board of Research and Technology for making this year's series possible. As most of you probably know who are in this room, our lectures focuses on, or our series rather, is focusing on climatic change, with our goal being that we wanted to give to the Missoula community a better understanding of global warming, both the policy as well as the sustainable technological solutions, and then also a primer on the science. So over the past 2 weeks, we've learned about the science of climatic change, and we've also learned about a lot of the amazing, innovative technologies that are present. In tonight's lecture, we're going to delve into the federal policies that prevent us from addressing climatic change here in the United States. So building upon the last two lectures, tonight's lecturer, David Merrill, will illuminate the role of doctored science in informing United States decision makers' climatic change policy. Merrill warns that this junk science strikes right at the soul of our republic and imperils all of humanity. David Merrill is the founder and the executive director of the globalwarmingsolution.org. So if you want to look it up, that's also its web address. This growing coalition is the only American national environmental organization advocating specific and deep and greenhouse gas reductions by a clear deadline. So it's a very innovative group. David has a long history of working on environmental policy issues here in Montana. He's been a community organizer for the Montana Environmental Information Center, as well as the executive director of the Alliance for the Wild Rockies. He also served as the administrative director for the Great Bear Foundation, which is Chuck Jonkel's group. Moreover, David has a quality that I personally deeply admire, which is a belief that citizens have the power to make a difference in public policy. So with no further ado, I would love to introduce David Merrill.
Thank you, Holly, and good evening. Everybody hear me clearly? No. Shaking heads. We have technical problems already. Oh, wait a minute. I think my mic is off. How's that? Okay. See, it's easy to solve these big problems. I'm happy to be here tonight with you and like to extend my thanks to the University of Montana and the funds from the National Science Foundation, EPSCoR, and also their staff for putting together the Science Within Society series, Climatic Change. Heraclitus once said, "A nation's character is its fate." And I hope to show you tonight that on the issue of the growing threat of global warming, although it has scientific aspects and technological aspects and policy aspects, its resolution will turn on the question of the character of one nation, our own. And on this question, the fate of the earth rests. The great searchlight of history rests on the people of this nation as the next scene of history unfolds. What legacy will we write in these sands of time? What history will we write on this clean parchment at the dawn of this new century? It is remarkable that this series, Science Within Society, takes place at this time, because we are in the midst of one of the greatest assaults on public interested scientists in the history of the scientific enterprise. A couple of weeks ago, the scientific bodies of the G8 countries issued a very rare joint scientific statement directed at the G8 countries, and more specifically, the President of the United States. This unprecedented act was taken because the United States President has consistently ignored the pleadings of scientists, which now have been going on for 25 years in some regard, and with great urgency for 15 years. The President said that he wants to learn more about the problem. We've studied it to death. The scientists reached their consensus back in 1990. In the intervening 15 years, things have gotten much worse. In fact, they've gotten worse than they thought they might. There was always the possibility that things wouldn't be as bad, but they've gotten worse. A couple of weeks ago, Phil Cooney was accused of doctoring climate science reports. It was documented and printed in the New York Times article. The editing diminished the appearance of a threat from global warming. And the intentions are very obvious. When this was brought to light, he promptly resigned. He now works for ExxonMobil. We're going to talk about ExxonMobil tonight because they're a very key player and a very powerful symbol of the dilemma that we face. So on the eve of the G8, which starts next week in Scotland, hosted by Tony Blair, where global warming is going to be one of the top two issues, the greatest contributor to the problem, the United States, is going to show up. All 7 of the other countries have signed and ratified the treaty, and we have not. The nation that provides 22% of the global total, with only 5% of the population, is sitting on the sidelines. Over the course of his administration, the president has said, in essence, that he wants to solve this problem by making it worse. I assure you he did not choose those words. But that is the essence. He has repeatedly said, we want to stop the growth in greenhouse gas emissions. Let me get this straight. Stop the growth in means they still increase. And the scientists said in 1990, cut 60 to 80% immediately. It's 15 years later and carbon emissions are at an all-time high. The political leadership of the American government has imagined, without evidence, that Mother Nature can be negotiated with forever. This conceit has steered the mighty ship of civilization with its highly vulnerable cargo into perilous waters indeed. And we have struck, at high speed, a massive, unyielding object. And if you listen closely, you can hear the unmistakable and ominous trickle of running water as the deck pitches under your feet and a shadow of concern passes over the faces of the crew. The first night we were here, we reviewed some of the science. And I feel it's my obligation to extend a little bit on that scientific presentation because I think it created somewhat of an illusion. The threat of global warming is far more serious than the fact of the trends that are going the wrong way. There are already some very disturbing scenarios that are accelerating as we speak. And I'd like to acquaint you with the details of some of those. It's disturbing, but I want you to know that the coalition that I founded a year and a half ago and that I work with all the time is a coalition that's founded on work and optimism and believing that we can do much better than we are. The first scenario that you need to know about is the Gulf Stream. Because of the currents in the Atlantic Ocean and the way that they run, they bring warm tropical waters, which has changed the civilization and history of Northern Europe. But they've known that in times in the past, because of the change in the salinity of the water in the North Atlantic, that current can suddenly shut off. They believe it's related to melting ice. The Greenland ice sheet is melting. It's melting at a very rapid rate. Trillions of gallons of fresh water pouring into the North Atlantic. And they're starting to notice that there are some big currents that are shifting. Now, this brings out one of the vulnerabilities of climate change. It's not just natural impacts like getting hit with a massive hurricane or suffering through a drought. We live in a very vulnerable modern society. And one of the greatest vulnerabilities of a modern economy is the insurance system. There's certain bills that can't be paid. And if the Gulf Stream shifts off suddenly, all of Northern Europe would suddenly become uninhabitable. There would be mass streams of refugees, agriculture would cease, and a lot of activities that would be very, very economically viable would suddenly no longer be viable. That's one thing that's underway right now. Another scenario that's unfolding is in the Arctic. We all know about permafrost. Permafrost is frozen plants. What's been happening in the Arctic is the freezing cycle has been reversing, and a lot of those plants are starting to thaw. It's disturbing for a lot of reasons. A lot of them are structural. A lot of houses and buildings in Alaska are pitching at very alarming angles right now. But it's also disturbing for atmospheric chemistry because as the plants thaw, they release methane and carbon dioxide, two very powerful greenhouse gases. That's going on right now. It's going the wrong way. Another concern is methane hydrates. Methane hydrates is methane held under low temperature and pressure at the bottom of the ocean. And we know that in the past, again because of changes in temperature, that there have been massive releases of methane hydrates. Well, the oceans are warming. Anybody that's taken a third grade science class knows that that melts ice. And methane hydrates are starting to warm. That's a problem for two reasons. One, if it releases the gases into the atmosphere as it's done in the past, again, it increases the greenhouse effect. Another reason is that if it releases catastrophically, there could be a massive subterranean shift of the continental shelf, and all of a sudden an enormous wave would appear in the North Atlantic and wipe out the eastern seaboard of the United States, for example. We are pushing an exquisitely balanced planet beyond the tolerances that have allowed civilization to grow and to thrive. Another concern is the Antarctic ice shelf. One of the largest ice sheets in the world is the West Antarctic ice shelf. Now you have to keep in mind the scale of the ice in Antarctica. Antarctica is as large as the lower 48, and the ice covering that continent is an average over 1 mile thick. It's a very big ice cube. They've been disturbed over the years, over the past years, as they studied the melting in the Antarctic region, that sheet could become unstable because it's always flowing towards the ocean, and that's ice that's above the level of the ocean. It's on land. And they're concerned that if melting increases beyond a certain point, it could slide off the continent and displace the ocean water next to Antarctica and thus around the globe. 3 years ago, the leading scientists, British and American scientists, were asked about that. And they said, yes, it's melting, but we think it's a sleeping giant. Probably don't have to worry about it for about 1,000 years. Well, this January, they came to a scientific conference in Britain that Tony Blair had convened. And they were asked again about the West Antarctica ice sheet. And they said, we found something disturbing over the past year. They went to a remote area of Antarctica, and they found on the West Antarctic ice sheet these 3 enormous rivers blasting out ice and water at an enormous rate. In fact, it's coming out so fast, it's raising global sea levels 1/10 of a millimeter a year, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a very disturbing trend, and it's covering the whole planet. And they said, well, that sleeping giant is now an awakened giant. I felt that it was important to talk to you about this because we need to face that we are in a very grave situation. And in a sense, we may be in the beginnings of a fight for our lives and for the lives of our children. If you doubt this, look at the continent of Africa. Already, they estimate 160,000 people a year are dying from climate change, mostly women and children in Africa. The weather in Africa has become increasingly unstable over the past 2 years, and the rains that Africa depends on are becoming much more erratic. And the scientists say that it's probably because of the warming of the Indian Ocean due to the burning of fossil fuels. There's a very clear line that's opening up there, and we are responsible for it. In football talk, it's the beginning of the 4th quarter, and we're behind 3 touchdowns. And only a remarkable leap forward by the citizens of this country can hope to change the outcome, which is rearing up like some ethereal Frankenstein. The nation that was fired into existence with the proclamation, all men are created equal, is now putting all of humanity into deliberate peril. You ever wonder why something like this could happen? I have a lot. And I think I found part of the answer in a history book called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer. Some of you have read it. It was a bestseller at one time. He was a reporter during Hitler's rise to power in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. And he was talking about a trip he took to Berlin in 1935. Now, you have to remember that was 2 years after Hitler had taken power. He was a dictator. He was already persecuting Jews, that was widely known, and he was rearming the country. This was all very widely known in Germany. Some very, very disturbing things were happening, and a lot of political opponents had been murdered. This was general knowledge. And so he started talking in the book about how he's traveling to Berlin. And I imagined at the next paragraph in the book, he would tell me how dark and foreboding the scene in Berlin was. And he said he got to Berlin. Not only was it not dark and foreboding, he said it was one of the most happy, joyous, vibrant places he had ever been in his life. And he just was so struck by that. And he looked around, the people were healthy, they were happy, there seemed to be a real air of optimism, and he couldn't resolve this contradiction. So he investigated like a reporter would, and he finally reached somewhat of a conclusion. He said, I think the main reason is their full lunch buckets as they walk off to work. The German economy had been shattered, and Hitler rose up in the ashes of that economy. There was outrageous inflation, there was great political instability. Hitler came to power, and he got a great engine of the economy going, the armaments industry. And all of a sudden, all these people that were out of work had work. They had full lunch buckets. They were keeping their lives together in their modern economy. So they started overlooking things. Now, is that too much of a stretch? Because I personally feel that we are in a very similar moral position as the people of Nazi Germany. If you look at his rise to power, if even 1% of Germans had organized and resisted, he would have been stopped. There were a couple times where it was very, very close. People just didn't do anything, and it just kept happening. Now, I don't think that we can count on the current government in the United States to take the steps that are needed at this late date to address global warming. And it's my firm conviction that the only thing standing between us and going off an ecological cliff is the people of this country and the people in this room who came out on a glorious summer night. What our government is doing is, I think, also more than a technological problem. It's definitely, I think, kind of an attack on us as people. When you think about how you're raised and all the work that your parents go into teaching you right from wrong, and all the time that teachers spend in schools acquainting you with the ideals of our country. And for me, I went to church every Sunday of my childhood life learning about the fact that we feel that we're all God's children and that there's one world and one human family. And then you come of age and you watch these powerful, wealthy people that are in control of our country, and they don't heed the pleadings of the world scientific community as we're going down this very dangerous path, just because they don't want to, because it's not in their political economic interest. I think the ideals of this country that have been so gloriously enunciated in the Declaration of Independence, so passionately pursued in the American Revolution, so agonizingly preserved in the Civil War, and so fiercely defended in the Second World War, have been gravely compromised. Why is it that we live in a country now where so often the things that matter so much to you and I don't matter to the people that are in power? A key element of this is the rise of unchecked private interest in the form of massive corporations who deploy lobbyists to create loopholes, tax accountants to exploit them, and who routinely oppose the public interest, as well as a growing class of wealthy people who think their highest civic duty is to amass private fortune and support politicians who will assist them in their material ambitions. ExxonMobil, to cite an example that I mentioned earlier, funds dozens of think tanks in the United States, recently revealed in a Mother Jones editorial, a feature article. But I didn't need to know the paper because I've encountered that here in Montana, one of the most sparsely populated states in the country. There's an organization in Bozeman called the Foundation for Research in Economics and the Environment. A couple of months ago, someone called me from Bozeman and asked me to respond to a disturbing editorial they had seen, which said that we shouldn't try that hard to address global warming because that would interfere with the fight against poverty. Forgetting, of course, that the people that are most hurt by global warming are the poor of the world. It was written by somebody from this Foundation for Research in Economics and the Environment. I went to their website, and one of their top funders is ExxonMobil. Because it was going right to the heart of our work, I felt like I had to respond, which, as you know, takes some time. I'm very busy. I took a time out. I wrote an editorial. Then I had to plead with the paper to print it. And they finally did. 3 or 4 weeks later, they came out with another column. The paper printed it and brought up some of the same charges. You see what's going on here? Do you realize how easy it is for a corporation like ExxonMobil to give a foundation like that $10,000 or $50,000 and have them print out this garbage to distort the American public? It's interesting, in the 1990s, as the science tightened up and as public opinion in Europe galvanized for strong action to address global warming, public opinion actually was going the wrong way in the United States. And the clearest reason we can see for that is that this pattern of confusing the American public by funding scientists without credentials who don't have peer-reviewed papers, or simply people to write favorable editorials in newspapers, was having a very effective impact. This behemoth corporation, in my opinion, is a spiritual descendant of an earlier out-of-control corporation backed by state power, known as the British East India Tea Company. Not only was this form of commerce not embraced by the Founding Fathers, its dangers were expressly warned against. This phalanx of private and state power has violated the spirit which animated the birth of our nation and fundamentally broken the unspoken social compact between commerce, the government sworn to act in the public interest, and the citizens. An unelected carbon mafia has taken over the ship of state, and we're the passengers. It's time we stood up to them. We are in a deepening night, but as I will show you tonight, this could be our finest hour, depending on decisions that people like you make in the very near future, even tonight. It will, as I said, ultimately be a question of character. What can we do about it, is the question I always get. Well, it turns out there's plenty we can do, as Guy Dauncey showed us last week. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the coalition. I founded it about 1.5 years ago. The reason I did was that I felt that because in the United States, at that point, the scientific consensus had been around for 13 years, and there still was not a national environmental organization that was calling for deep emission cuts by a specific deadline. So I thought about, well, what would be the most desirable policy that we could act within reason? And I consulted with experts around the country. And they said that you should come up with that solution and then attract groups to that vision, rather than bring everybody under a tent and see what we're going to do. So that's the path that I took. We now have 33 member organizations representing about 320 groups from Hawaii to New England. And they've all been attracted to a solution that we call the 3 R's of a global warming solution. The 3 R's are to ratify the Kyoto Protocol, to redirect the multi-billion-dollar federal subsidies for fossil fuels and nuclear power to renewable energy, and third, to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions 80% below 1990 levels by 2020, a mere 15 years away. Some people say, how is this possible, and how is this going to work? And what can individual people do? And how can this new coalition work against Bush? It's too small, it's too weak, doesn't have enough money. And I say to that, we're small, but we're only small in the sense that an acorn is small. we have to look at potentiality. It's important to know what is in this country today on global warming. It's even more important to know what could be. But more fundamentally, the coalition is born because we're trying to convince people all over the country that we are reality-creating animals. We can create reality. The most important reality that we're dealing with now is not a question of physical reality, it's a question of political reality, even spiritual reality. We can have the future that we want. We have the future that we have today, yes, because of corrupt leadership, but also because you and I have allowed it to happen. We need to ratify the Kyoto Protocol because that is the world's plan for addressing global warming. And I'll tell you, a lot of people around the world are becoming angry, and some of them are becoming scared. Last fall, some of you attended our fundraiser, which was the former Minister of the Environment from Trinidad and Tobago came up. His country is mortally threatened by the United States because they're an island nation. The sea levels are rising. And the more fossil fuels we burn, the more they're going to rise. They're worried about that, and they should be. The other part of the vision is redirecting the subsidies from fossil fuels and nuclear power to renewable energy. We know the potentiality of renewable energy. There is no question that the economy of the United States and the entire global economy could be run on 100% renewable energy. We have a carbon-based economy because of some historical factors, and we're holding on to it because of some corrupt political actors. There's no reason that we have to continue down this path. The new green economy, which we must have, if we are to continue as a viable civilization, offers infinite possibilities. Just look around from the recently announced Eco-Imagination project of General Electric, one of the largest corporations in the world, to small shopkeepers earning the respect and loyalty of their customers through offering green products and services and greener operations. What is our coalition doing? I'd like to acquaint you with some of the things that we've done and where we think we're headed. We're focusing right now on President Bush and the ratification of the Kyoto Treaty. And that is certainly not a consensus opinion in the American environmental community. We don't see any other way until the world comes together with the United States. In the next 10 years, there are 1,200 new coal plants slated to come online, mostly in the United States, China, and India. That cannot happen. That simply cannot happen. That'll be too much carbon in the atmosphere, and there'll be no hope of addressing global warming. We have to move very, very quickly, and there must be a binding international treaty that the U.S. is not only participating in, but is leading. Our first action may strike some as amusing. Some of you know about it. But again, we're starting small, but we think our ideas are big. We had a Kyoto Protocol Valentine campaign earlier this year. The reason we did was that the Kyoto Treaty came into effect on February 16th, worldwide, for the signatory countries, but not in the United States. We felt that that date had to be marked 2 days after Valentine's Day, so we had people send in these Kyoto Protocol Valentines from around the country to the White House. I don't think they knocked on the Oval Office door and dropped off the Valentines. I'm sure he never heard about them. So people said, why are you doing that? I said, well, it's an important date. We're a national coalition. We want the treaty ratified, and we need to bear witness. The idea of bearing witness comes from the Quakers. And it was amplified by the thinking of Mother Teresa, who said, because you can do but little does not mean you should do nothing. So we sent these Kyoto Protocol Valentines to the White House. And then the culmination of the event was I showed up in Washington on Valentine's Day, and I had these artists make this 10-foot Kyoto Protocol Valentine, which we had close. And then I called all the media in Washington, D.C., and I said, I'm going to be at noon at the edge of the White House grounds across from the Oval Office on Valentine's Day. And I'm going to make a statement and unveil a Kyoto Protocol Valentine, which said, hey, George, sign Kyoto, had our website. So I woke up that morning, and actually I was really excited about taking the trip to DC, but I woke up that morning and I just kind of had this real doubt about this whole thing. I was sleeping in a townhouse in Capitol Hill. It was pouring rain. I was picturing all the paint like coming off the Valentine. I'd asked the world media to meet me there with a 10-foot Valentine, and there wasn't any turnout. It was just me. And so I was like, what am I doing? Then we went to pick up the Valentine. The website was spelled wrong. I had to fix that. I started to get kind of panicky. And then I got dropped off by the White House, and we had about 10 minutes, but you can't park the car near the White House, so the person that was with me had to go, she had this Hollywood scene. She drove 12 blocks away. She had to flag a cab to speed back to the White House. Meanwhile, I was learning that I couldn't carry the Valentine to the media site. And so if you can believe this, I was in the ellipse with this 10-foot wooden Valentine in my head, trying to look really composed with this new national coalition. I realized, I'm not going to walk up to any media in this situation, so I had to hide in these National Park Service trucks. I was hiding in these Park Service trucks with this Valentine, and then my cell phone rang, and the artists were over at the media location. They said, Dave, there's all these cameras over here. You've got to get over here. I'm like, I can't lift this thing. So I kept hiding, and they ran over and rescued me, and we just walked over, and I did look composed, and we opened the Valentine, and it's fantastic. Every wire service was there. It got picked up by BBC. The image went around the world. People wrote me from the Caribbean. I got calls from India. Website traffic quadrupled. It was very, very successful considering where we had started. So that was our first event. Now, consider the image. It's a Valentine and a heart. It's a heart and an earth, excuse me. It's a Valentine. And that seems kind of sentimental, doesn't it? But when you think about the world today, that may be the only way out, is we're going to have to love each other. So that was our first event. Our next event, again focusing on the White House, is taking place next week, and it's called the Fast to Slow Global Warming. And we are going to be fasting at the White House for 3 days. It's taking place during the G8 summit, and it's timed exactly. We'll start sundown on the 5th, and they said if you get 30 people to fast at the White House, that will be really interesting, and the media will come. So the other day we had 31 people, and the number is still going up. So we're really excited about that. And people from around the country can participate in the fast. Just go to our website, globalwarmingsolution.org. You can fast on your own. You can start a companion fast, or if you know people in the DC area, they could join us at the White House. People say, why are you fasting? Well, in a way, it kind of reminds me of my uncle who was a minister, and he was a wonderful counselor. I mean, he counseled me when I was going through something when I was younger. And he's just a wonderful guy to talk to. But I know, because I lived with him for 6 months, that a lot of times he would get in situations with people where he didn't know what to do. And so what do you think he said? My Uncle Andy, this Italian guy, wonderful guy, he said, why don't we pray about it? And he was such a wonderful guy, and he was so warm that just the way he was made you feel better. Now, I don't think our problems are going to be solved by prayer alone, but prayer may be something to do with it. And I think a fast is a way for us to say, we're in a really big problem. We have this guy in the White House that isn't doing the right thing in this issue, and we're flicking through the channels. What channel's going to work? And they're all nonviolent channels. How can we communicate? So the fast is a way of communicating to the public. We feel it's our responsibility as environmental activists to communicate how serious it is. And I assure you, the fact that I'm not going to eat next week for 3 days is very serious to me. It's just a way of communication. It's also a way to communicate through the media to the president that people are doing unusual things because of your policies. the next thing that we're going to unfold after the fast, and this will bring in a lot, we're quite sure it's going to be covered now, and this will bring a lot more people into our coalition. We've had some of the people that worked on Howard Dean's internet campaign that are helping us, and we're just bringing more and more people. The people that we're closest to are the people like you that are new to the issue and want to do more. I know not all of you are new to the issue, but many of you are. And that's where we find that there's really great energy, and that's where the true hope of this country and the world lies. And we need to remember that we need to become, if we're to solve this problem, a different kind of citizen. We all know the importance of being a responsible adult, but so often that has meant having a career, paying bills, and having a nice house and a good car. And these things are important. We've created a situation where that is important. But it's not all. I mean, when you think about it, we should be like fists of fire. We're here. We're born into this world, and the world will not be the same because we lived. And the world needs us now. I feel that in the heart, all of our hearts, is the whole drama of the world. And until we embrace a set of values that reflects this eternal truth, our dreams for our nation, this troubled planet, and the lives of our children will continue to shatter all around us. And perhaps we could start with gratitude for this exquisite, exciting, mysterious garden we will inhabit for all of our days. This blue-green gem hurtling through frigid space is a home fitting for the fantastic imagination of the human mind, a worthy challenge to our spirit and character, and a tender cradle for the nurturing and consecration of life. An invisible shroud of gases frosted with clouds is our atmosphere. The air that hangs in faithful intimacy with us in sorrow and in joy, in sleep and waking, this timeless and marvelous companion inhabiting even this room, is now showing signs of fever and instability. But I think we all know that our fevered atmosphere is just the most serious symptom in a long train of abuses. It's time we realize that the earth is more beautiful than it is useful, and that we dedicate ourselves to seeing that the new world we all crave doesn't die on the table of history. Nature is the fruitful giving servant, the long unappreciated mother who we have deemed unfit to be a dance partner. But this too is ultimately a conceit, for she is mysteriously veiled benefactor of the dance itself, and who dances with all without discrimination. She is the ultimate dance partner, the one we so crave. If we would but let her teach us the infinitely more complex and thrilling steps of the great dance of life, in which humanity has a glorious part to play, we would know, as the native peoples of this continent have tried to teach us, what it means to be a happy people. There is a material aspect of life. Indeed, it is critical. But it is not all, or even the most important part. I say to you that we are brothers and sisters first, and mindless material accumulation is an insufficient basis for the cravings of the human spirit, and a positive menace to a finite, fragile, and now gravely threatened biosphere. And we should be judging our leaders on the basis of their ability to serve under unprecedented ecological peril. And we must always bear in mind that all economies, past, present, and future on this earth, rest on an ecological foundation. And to those powerful business owners and wealthy individuals and corporate executives and blue-collar workers who have become embittered by the growing influence of the rising tide of an American environmental consciousness, I ask them to help us pick up the shining fragments of our national dream. Help us pick up these broken pieces scattered on the land, in the halls of government, and in our hearts back into that blue-green bejeweled vase. As we piece it back together, it will surely show cracks, but it will still hold water, and flowers will continue to issue forth the bloom and fragrance of our nation's ideals, hopes, and proud accomplishments. Man truly cannot live by bread alone, and any nation that tries to prove otherwise will lose both happiness and bread. We must face the undemocratic corrosion of the fiber of our national will, this shameless intrusion into the sacred deliberations of our elected representatives by overturning the tables of the money changers in the great hall of the people. No self-respecting nation can tolerate this one more day. We need a new American set of values that enshrines in our national life that government should serve the public interest without undue influence from private wealth. And we also need a new set of values fit for the ecological realities of this lovely blue star we inhabit, and which has generously issued forth sustenance and delight in every shape and hue for so long. Perhaps the time has come for our nation to enshrine forever the right of each American, from the chairman of ExxonMobil to every African-American child born in an American city, to abundant fresh air pouring through a bedroom window as they lay down their heads at night, to pure water, abundant parkland, saltwater fisheries, and abundant open spaces from the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to the Everglades. So there is cause for hope, but the sunlight of hope is the fiber of our being. And there's only cause for hope if we act on a great scale and act immediately. Only radical surgery will save us. This nation has been warned. In history and before all of humanity, standing in this lovely garden, and in freedom and together, the future lies in our strong and tender hands. And my faith in the essential goodness of the American people leaves me steeped in hope. Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Can you say what activities are going on in Missoula next week?
The activities that are going on in Missoula? We have I'm sorry. The question was, what are the activities that are going on in Missoula this week? I need to paraphrase the question, sorry. We have a weekly volunteer meeting that meets every Wednesday night at Liquid Planet. And you're welcome to join us for those meetings. It's from 8:30 to 10. That's kind of a regular thing that we're having. We're not having it tonight or next week because of the fast preparations. You want to participate in a fast in Missoula? Claudia, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I brought with me copies.
This is one of our volunteers, Claudia Brown.
I'm going to Washington to fast also. I brought with me some copies of a pledge form if anybody is interested in fasting in solidarity with us for the earth. The best thing to do if you have a computer is to go to www.globalwarmingsolution.org and click on a fast to slow global warming, and that will bring up all the information. And also, and a really important part, I think, David, is letting people know that if they let us know they're fasting, that the numbers of people who fast with us give us more credibility with the press. And so what I brought with me includes a rationale and also a form. And you can send in the form to, is it P.O. Box 92?
92-1, or you could just call the office. We have an office in the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center that we opened last week, and other people are fasting in Missoula, so you could stop by or call the office, and we'll add your name to the list.
Where is the office?
It's at the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center, which is, do you know where that is? It's right at the intersection of 3rd and Higgins, and we have an office right off the shop there.
And you
Sure,
have
right.
postal address. There are an awful lot of people that don't have the access to the websites and all that.
Sure. Yeah, the address is P.O. Box 9201, and that's, yeah, it's Missoula 59807. And we also have a clipboard with our petition, which supports the 3 R's of global warming solution. And if you'd like to get into our network, that's the best way to sign our petition and give us your contact information. We also have some website cards which you can take to remind you to go to our website. And we've also brought some donation envelopes were supported by grassroots people just like you, and if you'd like to donate to the work that we're doing, we'd love that. No gift is too small. And this is our intern from Middlebury College in Vermont, Minna Brown, and so she's going to start that stuff around. Question?
Could you talk about the G8 summit and Britain's leadership in trying to get more focus on global warming and
Sure.
and
Foreign policy is largely driven by, I'm sorry, I'll try to remember. The question was, could I talk about the G8 meeting and Tony Blair's leadership on the issue of global warming? Foreign policy is largely driven by domestic politics. And it's sometimes difficult for Americans to grasp how different it is in Europe. I mean, for the last 15 years, we've had these bogus scientists getting incredible media attention in the United States. They're the laughing stock in Europe. They get it over there. It's been a consensus opinion for a very long time, and they're moving very aggressively to address it. Britain already has long-term plans to cut 60%. And so he's getting a lot more pressure domestically than our president is getting here, which is what our coalition is designed to address. Ultimately, President Bush and Tony Blair, they're political actors. They make political calculations all the time. That's their job. They're very good at it. We have to change the political calculation. And Tony Blair admits it's a very serious problem, admits it's human-caused, and wants to address it. And he's addressing it quite forcefully, certainly in comparison to the United States. So a lot of that is coming from domestic pressure.
David, I have 10 copies of the form.
Okay.
that people
Okay.
take.
Claudia has copies if you need to get a pledge form tonight. Any other questions?
I wanted to thank you for the fine job with your presentation. It would be great to get it published at some point. But I also wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about the Lentz memo and if you think that it's still getting a lot of play.
Are you talking about the from the Republican pollster?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not as big a story anymore. She's referring to a Republican operative that advised not to talk about, they talk about global warming using the term climate change and to kind of neutralize the threat. And this is just another example. I mean, the biggest story now in terms of that is the story with Phil Koenig, which just broke a couple weeks ago. So it's been a long, long time that this has been going on. And I've been working on this, studying this issue for 8 years now. And I still can't believe what our government's doing. It's kind of beyond belief. Any other questions? Thanks for coming tonight.